In order to facilitate the solution of the foregoing reasons, certain things must be set forth in order to explain the order and process of human and generally animal generation. First, therefore, it must be known that the opinion of some who say that the works of life which appear in the embryo before its final completion are not from any soul or power of the soul existing in it, but from the soul of the mother, is false. For if this were true, the embryo would no longer be an animal, since every animal consists of soul and body. The operations of life, too, do not proceed from an external active principle, but from an internal power, in which the living seem to be particularly distinguished from the non-living, which properly move themselves. For that which is nourished assimilates to itself nourishment, whence the power of nourishment must be active in the nourished, when the agent acts like itself. And this sense is much more manifest in the works, for seeing and hearing belong to a man by virtue of some power existing in him, and not in another. Hence, when the embryo is found to be nourished before its final completion. Yet it cannot be said that in the seed from the very beginning there is a soul complete in its essence, whose operations, however, do not appear because of the lack of organs. For when the soul is united to the body as a form, it is united only to the body of which it is properly an act. Now the soul is the act of the organic body. Therefore, prior to the organization of the body in the seed, there is no actual soul, but only potential or virtue. Wherefore also Aristotle says, in Tu de Anima, that seed and fruit are such that they have the power to have life because they cast off the soul, that is, they lack soul. It would also follow, if from the beginning the soul was in the seed, that the generation of the animal was only by decision, as it is in ringed animals, that two are made from one. For if the seed had a soul as soon as it was cut off, it would already have a substantial form. But every substantial generation precedes the substantial form. It does not follow it. But if any transformations follow the substantial form, they are not directed to the being of the begotten, but to his own good. Thus, therefore, the generation of an animal would be completed in the very decision of the seed. But all the subsequent transformations would be irrelevant to the generation. But it is still more ridiculous if this is said of the rational soul, and because it is impossible for it to be divided according to the division of the body, so that it can be in a decided seed, and because it would follow that in all pollutions from which the concept does not follow, rational souls would nevertheless be multiplied. Nor can it be said, as some say, that even though from the beginning of the decision the soul is not actually in the seed, but by virtue, because of the deficiency of the organs, yet the very power of the seed, which is a body that can be organized, though not organized, is proportionally to the soul of the seed in potentiality, but not actually. And because the life of a plant requires fewer organs than the life of an animal, when the first seed is sufficiently organized for the life of a plant, the aforesaid power itself becomes the vegetable soul. Then, with more perfected and multiplied organs, I brought it to be a sensitive soul. And further, when the form of the organs is perfect, the same soul becomes rational, not indeed by the action of the power of the seed, but by the influx of an external agent. For which reason they suspect Aristotle to have said that the understanding is from without, in a book on the generation of animals. For according to this position, it would follow that some virtue would be the same number now only as a vegetable soul, and afterwards as a sensitive soul. And thus the substantial form itself would be continually more and more perfected. And it would further follow that a substantial form should be brought forth from power into action, not at once, but successively. and further that generation was a continuous movement, as also alteration. All these things are impossible in nature. A still greater objection would follow, namely, that the rational soul was mortal. For nothing formally coming to a corruptible thing makes it itself incorruptible by nature. Otherwise, the corruptible would be changed into the incorruptible, which is impossible, since they differ according to their kind, as is said in 10 of Metaphysics. Now the sensible substance of the soul, since it is supposed to be accidentally generated from the body generated in the aforementioned process, is necessarily corruptible to the corruption of the body. If, therefore, it itself becomes rational by being led into a certain inner light, which formally relates to it, it is a sensitive intellectual power. It necessarily follows that the rational soul is corrupted by a corrupt body. This is impossible, as has been proved above, and the Catholic faith teaches. Therefore, the power itself which falls with the seed and is called formative is not the soul, nor does it become the soul in the process of generation, of the Father, to whom generation is ascribed as the principal begetter, not conceived by the power of the soul, even after the soul is present. For the conception does not beget itself, but is begotten by the Father. And this is evident to those who run through the individual virtues of the soul. For it cannot be attributed to the soul of the embryo by reason of the generative power, both because the generative power does not have its operation except by the complete work of nutritive and augmentative, which serve it since it is already perfect to generate, and because the work of reproduction is not directed to the perfection of the individual itself, but to the preservation of the species. Nor can it be attributed to the nourishing power, the work of which is to assimilate nourishment to nourishment, which does not appear here. For in the process of formation, nourishment is not drawn into the likeness of a pre-existing one, but is brought to a more perfect form and closer to the likeness of the Father. Similarly, neither are augmentatives, to which does not belong a change according to form, but only according to quantity. As for the sensitive and intellectual parts, it is clear that it has no work appropriated to such a formation. It is therefore left that the formation of the body, especially as regards the first and principal parts, is not from the begotten soul, nor from the formative power acting from its power, but acting from the power of the generative soul of the Father, whose work is to make it similar to the begetting one according to species, which does not appear here, for the nourishment in the process of formation is not drawn into the likeness of the pre-existing, but is led to a more perfect form and closer to the similitude of the Father. Similarly, neither are augmentatives, to which does not belong a change according to form, but only according to quantity. As for the sensitive and intellectual parts, it is clear that it has no work appropriated to such a formation. It is therefore left that the formation of the body, especially as regards the first and principal parts, is not from the begotten soul, nor from the formative power acting from its power, but acting from the power of the generative soul of the Father, whose work is to make it similar to the begetting one according to species, which does not appear here. For the nourishment in the process of formation is not drawn into the likeness of the pre-existing, but is led to a more perfect form and closer to the similitude of the Father. Similarly, neither are augmentatives, to which does not belong a change according to form, but only according to quantity. As for the sensitive and intellectual parts, it is clear that it has no work appropriated to such a formation. It is therefore left that the formation of the body, especially as regards the first and principal parts, is not from the begotten soul, nor from the formative power acting from its power, but acting from the power of the generative soul of the Father, whose work is to make it similar to the begetting one according to species, to which does not belong a change according to form, but only according to quantity. As for the sensitive and intellectual parts, it is clear that it has no work appropriated to such a formation. It is therefore left that the formation of the body, especially as regards the first and principal parts, is not from the begotten soul, nor from the formative power acting from its power, but acting from the power of the generative soul of the Father, whose work is to make it similar to the begetting one according to species, to which does not belong a change according to form, but only according to quantity. As for the sensitive and intellectual parts, it is clear that it has no work appropriated to such a formation. It is therefore left that the formation of the body, especially as regards the first and principal parts, is not from the begotten soul, nor from the formative power acting from its power, but acting from the power of the generative soul of the Father, whose work is to make it similar to the begetting one, according to species. Therefore, this formative force remains the same in the aforesaid spirit from the beginning of the formation to the end. However, the species once formed does not remain the same. For at first it has the form of seed, then of blood, and so on until it reaches its final completion. For although the generation of simple bodies does not proceed according to order, because each of them has the immediate form of the first matter, yet in the generation of other bodies there must be an order of generations, because of the many intermediate forms between the first form of the element and the last form to which the generation is directed. And therefore there are many successive generations and corruptions, nor is it inappropriate if something intermediate is generated and immediately afterwards interrupted, because intermediates do not have a complete species, but are, as it were, on the way to species. And therefore they are not generated in order to continue, but in order that through them the last generated may be reached. Nor is it surprising if the whole transformation of a generation is not continuous, but there are many intermediate generations. For this also happens in alteration and growth. For the whole change is not continuous, nor the whole increase, but only the local movement is truly continuous, as is clear in the 8th of physics. Therefore, in proportion as a certain form is more noble and more distant from the form of the element, so much must there be more intermediate forms by which the ultimate form is gradually arrived at, and consequently, more intermediate generations. And therefore in the generation of animals and men, in which there is the most perfect form, there are many intermediate forms and generations, and consequently corruptions, because the generation of one is the corruption of another. Therefore the vegetable soul, which is first present when the embryo lives the life of a plant, decays, and a more perfect soul succeeds it, which is nutritive and sensitive at the same time, and then the embryo lives the life of an animal. But, corrupted by this, the rational soul, sent in from without, succeeds, even though they had gone before by virtue of the seed. Having seen these things, it is easy to answer the objects. For it is first objected that it is necessary for the sensitive soul to have the same mode of origin in man and in brutes, from the fact that an animal is univocally predicated of them. We say that this is not necessary. For although the sensitive soul in man and brute agree according to the nature of the genus, yet they differ in species, as also those whose forms they are. For as the animal which is man differs in species from other animals, in that it is rational, so the sensitive soul of man from the sensitive soul of a brute it differs specifically in that it is also intellectual. The soul, therefore, in the brute has only that which is sensitive, and consequently neither being nor its operation is elevated above the body. Hence it must be born together with the generation of the body, and be corrupted with corruption. Now the sensitive soul in man, since it has an intellectual power above the sensitive nature, from which it is necessary that the very substance of the soul should be elevated above the body according to its existence and operation. It is neither generated by the generation of the body, nor corrupted by its corruption. Therefore, the different mode of origin in the aforesaid souls is not from the sensitive side, from which the reason of the species is taken, but from the intellectual side, from which the difference of species is taken. Hence it cannot be concluded that there is a diversity of genus, but only a diversity of species. But it is objected in the second place that the concept of an animal before a man does not show that the rational soul is propagated with the seed. For the sensitive soul through which it was an animal does not remain, but succeeds to it a soul, which is both sensitive and intellectual, from which it is animal and man at the same time, as is clear from what has been said. But what is objected to in the third place, that the actions of different agents are not limited to one fact, must be understood of different agents not being ordered. For if they are ordered to each other, there must be one effect of them. For the first cause, acting upon the effect of the second cause, acts more strongly than the second cause itself, from which we see that the effect which is effected by the principal agent through the instrument is more properly attributed to the principal agent than to the instrument. Now it sometimes happens that the action of the principal agent reaches to something in the work which the action of the instrument does not reach, just as the vegetative force leads to the species of flesh, to which the heat of fire, which is its instrument, cannot lead, although it operates by arranging for it to resolve and consume. When therefore every active power of nature is compared to God as an instrument to the first and principal agent, nothing prevents the action of nature from being limited to something of man, and not to all that is done by the action of God in the one and the same generation, which is man. Therefore the body of man is formed at the same time by the power of God as the principal and first agent, and also by the power of the seed as the second agent. But the action of God produces the human soul, which the power of the seed cannot produce, but disposes to it. Hence the solution to the fourth question is clear. For in this way, man begets what is similar to himself in species, inasmuch as the virtue of his seed works dispositively towards the ultimate form from which man is drawn into species. But there is nothing unseemly about God cooperating with adulterers in the action of nature. For it is not the nature of adulterers that is evil, but the will. Now the action which is from the power of the seed itself is natural, not voluntary. Hence it is not inappropriate if God cooperates with that operation by bringing about its final perfection. But what is objected to in the sixth, it is clear that it does not necessarily conclude. For even if it is granted that the body of man is formed before the soul is created, or vice versa, it does not follow that the same man is prior to himself, for man is not his body, nor his soul. Now it follows that some part of it is prior to the other. This is not inconvenient, for matter in time is prior to form. I mean matter according as it is in potential to form, not according as it is actually perfected through form, for thus it is together with form. Therefore the human body, insofar as it is in power to the soul, since it does not yet have a soul, it is earlier in time than the soul, but then it is not actually human, but only in potential. But when it is actually human, as if perfected through the human soul, it is not before or after the soul, but simultaneously with it. Nor does it follow, if the soul is not produced from the power of the seed, but only the body, that it is an imperfect operation both of God and of nature, as the seventh reason proceeded. For by the power of God both are made, both body and soul, although the formation of the body is by him through the power of the natural seed, but the soul is directly produced. Nor does it follow that the action of the virtue of the seed is imperfect when it accomplishes what it is for. It must also be known that in the seed of virtue are contained all those things which do not exceed bodily vigor, such as hay, stalks, internodes, and the like. From this it cannot be concluded that that which exceeds all bodily power in a man is contained in the seed of power, as the eighth reason concluded. But the fact that the operations of the soul seem to progress in the process of human generation, as the parts of the body do, does not show that the human soul and the body have the same principle as the ninth reason proceeded. But it shows that the arrangement of the parts of the body is necessary for the operation of the soul. But what is objected to in the 10th, that the body of the soul is formed, and for this reason the soul prepares a similar body for itself, is indeed partly true, but partly false. For if it is understood of the soul of the progenitor, what is said is true, but false if it is understood of the soul of the begotten. For it is not by the power of the begotten soul that the body is formed as to its first and the foremost parts, but by the power of the begetting soul, as has been proved above. For in the same way all matter is configured to its form. However, this configuration does not take place from the action of the generated, but from the action of the generating form. But what is objected to in the 11th concerning the life of the seed in the beginning of the decision? It is indeed clear from what has been said that it is not alive except in potentiality. Whence then it does not actually have a soul, but by virtue. But in the process of generation, it has a vegetative and sensible soul from the power of the seed, which do not remain, but pass away, succeeding the rational soul. Nor even if the formation of the body precedes the human soul, does it follow that the soul is because of the body, as the 12th reason inferred. For something exists for the sake of another in two ways. In the first way, because of its operation or preservation, or whatever is of this kind which results in being. And such things are posterior to the reason that they are, as clothes are for the sake of the man, and tools for the sake of the craftsman. In another way, something is for the sake of another, that is, for the sake of its being. And thus what is for the sake of another is first in time and in nature later. But in this way, the body is because of the soul, just as all matter is because of its form. But it would be different if the soul and the body did not become one second being, as those who maintain that the soul is not the form of the body say.